Should Artyom Levshunov be the pick at number 2 for the Chicago Blackhawks? I'll discuss that on today's episode, plus the rumors of Mitch Marner getting traded for Seth Jones.
You're Locked On Blackhawks, your daily podcast on the Chicago Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Real quick to everyone who's watching this on YouTube right now, just a reminder to hit that like button. Comment down below as well as to whether you think the Blackhawks should take Ivan Demidov or Artyom Levshunov with the second overall pick in this year's draft. And also make sure you're subscribed to the Locked On Blackhawks YouTube channel. I know I'm having a whole heck of a lot of new viewers here on the channel with this intriguing conversation on what the Blackhawks should do with the second overall pick. I'm also going to be having a lot of fun Blackhawks conversations here throughout the offseason that you're not going to want to miss out on. So make sure that you're subscribed to the channel. It also helps me out tremendously. And last but certainly not least, got to let you know today's episode is sponsored by Indeed, the only job site out there where you pay for applications that meet those must-have standards and requirements. Start hiring today at Indeed.com/lockedon. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Again, thank you all for joining me on another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, your one-stop shop for all things Chicago Blackhawks. Apologies for the episode coming out a little bit later on in the afternoon here, but buckle up because we sure got an exciting one on tap. And to kick things off today, it's time to get into my second 2024 NHL Draft Profile here on the show. I started things off yesterday with Ivan Demidov, the man who's widely considered to be the second most skilled player in this year's draft. Make sure to check out that episode if you haven't done so already. Today, I thought it would only be fitting to get into Artyom Levshunov, the man who's mostly considered to be in the mix with Demidov for the Blackhawks at number 2. There's a couple other guys who I think are in that conversation, but it's mostly surrounding around Demidov versus Levshunov for the Chicago Blackhawks. And Levshunov is a very interesting defenseman, particularly for the Blackhawks, as one of their biggest needs that they're going to want to address in this year's draft is adding another right-handed defenseman, because outside of Seth Jones, Sam Rinzel is really the only other guy in the entire organization that has like long-term plans here with this team. Yes, Connor Murphy's here right now, but getting into his 30s, he only has 2 years left on his current deal. I don't see him being a long-term piece. And other than Jones and Rinzel, it's Louis Crevier. The Blackhawks just don't have a lot of true right-handed defensemen in their organization. And that's why I think Artyom Levshunov, along with a ton of other right-handed defensemen, it's a right-handed defenseman heavy top 10, top 15 in particular in this year's draft. I think that's what makes Levshunov and all these other prospects so intriguing, considering the position the Chicago Blackhawks are in. But getting into Levshunov's profile here a little bit for those that aren't as familiar by now, even though I think most people are. 6'2", 210-pound right-handed defenseman that turned 18 back in October. So a little bit more physically mature than some of the other players going in this year's draft, but I think that actually did him wonders in his freshman campaign with Michigan State. He's also from Belarus, which I think is interesting, looking to be the third player ever from Belarus to be taken in the top 10 of the NHL draft. And if he were to be taken in the top 5, that would make him the first top 5 pick out of Belarus. So that's just a cool little tidbit thrown in there. But yeah, had an excellent season with the Michigan State Spartans as a freshman. He tallied 35 points in 38 games, 9 goals and 26 assists, the second best points per game among draftier defensemen in the last 25 years. And there have been a lot of good ones. Owen Power, I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And quite honestly, had Zeev Buium not gone and did what he did for Denver this year en route to a national championship, I think the offense of Levshunov would be talked about a little bit more here. Literally the only man he's behind in terms of points per game over the last 25 years is Zeev Buium. So Levshunov has a really high ceiling, a really, really good offensive-minded defenseman already at a young age. And he also took a really huge leap compared to or from his first to his second year over in North America. His first year in the States, he spent playing in the USHL with the Green Bay Gamblers, put up 42 points in 62 games there, 13 goals, 29 assists. The playmaking and development in those areas really shined this past year with Michigan State. 26 assists in 38 games at a much tougher level compared to 29 and 62 the year prior. So really took advantage of this opportunity and quite honestly made the leap from the USHL to Division I men's hockey look fairly easy. But all in all, he's a good offensive-minded defenseman that has good size along with it for being 18 years old. But he plays an offensive style. That's just kind of the way I think he looks at the game is offense first. Not that he doesn't care about defense. I actually think he's a really reliable and steady defender when he's in the right positions, but it just feels like he's always thinking offense. He's trying to play a transition game, and he kind of fits a modern day offensive-minded defenseman in terms of trying to jump into the rush, trying to make plays when they open up on the other side of things and give his team an odd man opportunity. So I think he kind of fits in with the modern day style of where the NHL has kind of been trending over these last few years. In terms of the rankings for Levshunov, Elite Prospects had him 4th, Bob McKenzie 3rd, Craig Button had him 5th, Tony Ferrari has him 6th, McKean's Hockey 7th, Chris Peters all the way up at number 2, Daily Faceoff 3rd, and Dobber Prospects 9th. So widely regarded as a top 10 prospect, depending on who you ask. He's going to have a different position, but he's probably going to be the top defenseman taken off of the board this year. It's just a matter of when he ends up going. Breaking down his strengths and weaknesses, there's a lot of strengths to his game, man. First and foremost, what stands out to me is he skates really well for his size at 6'2" and like a girthy 6'2", right? Already 210 pounds. I wouldn't say he's like a fly by you skater, but he's got a really powerful stride, and it feels like it doesn't take him long to get up to top speed. I don't envision him like ever being the defender to blow by people, but good skater in the offensive zone for like a free flowing, puck moving type of mentality. And like I said, uses that skating ability to recognize plays in front of him and jump up on rushes and give his team an odd man opportunity. And all in all, just plays a mobile game. He's kind of always moving, a little bit of a rover back there, if you will. But he pairs that by, like I said, always having that offensive mindset. He thinks the game offensively, but I also think he does play a reliable defensive style too. Like he takes good angles. He really has good gap control. He's able to separate players from the puck. He can be physical. He's not like overtly physical, but can lay the boom, can be a big body. And he also plays really strong in front of his goaltender, holds down the fort in the blue paint, ties up sticks really well there for being a young kid. He plays a mature game on the defensive side of things, and then pairs that with a good passing ability too. I think he's a good puck mover out of the defensive zone when he gets it on his stick. He's also capable of skating it out of harm's way as well. And all in all, just thinks the game well in all three zones. Like he's got a good mind and pairs it up with some good skills, mostly on the offensive side of things. And I feel like based on what I saw from the film on him at Michigan State this past year, the plays that he was making and how well he thinks the game, I feel like he's one of those guys that'll be better with better teammates. He'll benefit from having better guys around him. But in full, to tie a bow on Artyom Levshunov's strengths here, he's just a good all-around defenseman. Maybe there's not that one skill that really shines, but a good puck mover, thinks the game really well, plays in transition, and then defensively is reliable, takes good angles, has a long reach, has a big body in front of his goaltender, can mix it up physically. I don't think he's going to be like a guy who will run you through the wall, but in front of his own goaltender, he'll knock you down in those areas. So I really like his game. I think he shapes up to be a really sturdy defenseman in this year's draft. As far as the weaknesses, I think he needs to continue to develop his shot. The 9 goals that he scored this year, I don't know how many of them would have gone in against higher caliber goaltenders. Now you can make that argument about a lot of the goals the kids score at the college level, but from a defenseman standpoint, it doesn't feel like Artyom Levshunov really has that booming shot from the point yet. I think he's got to continue to get some power on there. And I don't know if he's going to be a true sniper from back in the blue line. Also, Sometimes he just kind of doesn't pick and choose when to jump up on rushes and when to take risks at the right time. He has a really aggressive mindset, and sometimes that works well for him, but also sometimes that bites him back in the butt. But it's kind of just something that I think an offensive minded defenseman at 18 years old is going to have to deal with more times than not. He also can be susceptible to making some boneheaded passes and boneheaded turnovers, can make some risky, like no look behind the back passes along the walls to the center ice that were turnovers this past year. So he's just got to kind of clean some things up in his defensive game. That happens with a young 18-year-old defenseman. And then I would say, again, there's not just like one area of his game that really jumps out to you. And that's kind of okay. That's what makes defensemen sometimes really tough to gauge. Is you don't always have to be exciting to get your job done really well. Levshunov has some exciting offensive skills, but he doesn't really jump out to you like a player with the skill set that Ivan Demidov has. And now they're two completely different players, two completely different positions. But Demidov, I don't know if he necessarily holds that superstar upside, whereas Ivan Demidov, I think he does possess that. So as far as my projection for Artyom Levshunov, I do think he's going to be a top 4 defenseman with a good all-around game at the NHL level, someone who, as he continues to mature and ripen and get more experience, he's going to get more and more reliable defensively, because I think he does show good tendencies when he's in the right position. He doesn't make a whole lot of defensive flaws in terms of like his positioning or gap control. He's rather steady in that area. And I think because of that, along with being a right-handed shot, right? Those are always intriguing in NHL drafts. I firmly believe Artyom Levshunov is going to be a top 5 pick in this year's draft and more than likely going to be the first defenseman off the board. I think he's always going to be more valuable in the offensive zone and in transition. I can already kind of picture him being a good defenseman to cycle the puck with. Like if you could imagine in the offensive zone, defensemen jumping in, taking the puck down low, looping their way back to the blue line. He can do that. He recognizes where open space is out there. He knows how to pivot and separate himself from defenders to help himself out and getting open and also help his teammates out. And that goes back to him having that good understanding, that good recognition out there. I think that's really prevalent in Artyom Levshunov's game. And also one thing that I do kind of wonder about, I don't know necessarily if he screams a top power play quarterback, because there isn't really that one area that jumps out. I think he's going to be a good playmaker, but the shot needs to continue to develop. Offensive minded for sure. I don't know if he's like a staple of one of the best power plays in the NHL though. And all in all, there's nothing really all that flashy about him, but again, that's okay being a defenseman. Sometimes boring is good. In terms of the long-term fit for the Blackhawks, surely that would be another big-time right-handed shot defenseman that's added to the Blackhawks organization. They really need to do that in this year's draft, and would be another guy along with Sam Rinzel on the right side that has top 4 upside. I don't think he's going to be NHL ready next year, but quite honestly, I don't think the Blackhawks would expect him to be. That kind of fits perfectly with where they're at in their rebuild. And it could be another talented player down in Rockford next year, along with, maybe Nolan Allen is back there again. We could see Ethan Del Mastro possibly, Wyatt Kaiser, Kevin Korchinski, Louis Crevier. Like that decor is going to be basically all about future pieces of the puzzle on the blue line for the Blackhawks. So Levshunov would fit in nicely there and just gives the Hawks more security on their right-hand side in the future and really rounds out that decor potentially with Vlasic, Del Mastro, Kaiser, Rinzel, Nolan Allen, all those guys. Kind of puts a stamp, if you will, on the Blackhawks decor. Last but certainly not least, in terms of the Demidov versus Levshunov debate, where do I kind of stand on that? I personally lean Ivan Demidov. I just can't stop watching this kid's highlights and thinking about having the ability to pair him with Connor Bedard for years and years to come. I think they both think the game the same way. They're both creative geniuses out there and are willing to try things that not a lot of others do. Demidov's skill is just undeniable, and I think Artyom Levshunov is going to be a really reliable right-handed defenseman of the future. I just don't know how you could pass on Demidov's skill, knowing he could be the left-handed shot to Bedard's right-handed shot for years to come on the power play and on the top line. Demidov, he is the second most skilled player in this year's draft. To me, it's really not a question. So I don't think there's a wrong answer here per se. Like the Blackhawks, adding Levshunov would be huge to their blue line. They need a right-handed defenseman in their organization. But to me, I just don't know how you could pass on a player of the caliber of Ivan Demidov, because if he works out, if he reaches his ceiling, it's all-star, superstar type of potential with the way that he maneuvers out there. He's a special, special player. So is Artyom Levshunov, and I wouldn't be angry if the Blackhawks took him. I would be a little bit salty, though, that they passed up on a player the caliber of Ivan Demidov. So that's the way I see it, but there's really no wrong answer here per se. The Blackhawks are in a really good position, and it's just going to come down to what they kind of value more, taking a right-handed defenseman early or taking a skill player to add alongside Connor Bedard. The reason I also feel that way is because I think the Blackhawks could get a really good right-handed defenseman at number 20, or potentially package picks to trade up and get another one of them. You can't trade up and get another Ivan Demidov. That's how I feel personally. Go and drop your feelings on that in the comment section down below. Do you think the Hawks should take Ivan Demidov or Artyom Levshunov with the second overall pick in the 2024 NHL Draft? All right, there is the second of many 2024 NHL Draft Profiles that I'll be doing here on the show all throughout the summer. Coming up in just a moment, Blackhawks fans, don't go anywhere, because I still got to share my thoughts on the interesting conversation being thrown out there on Mitch Marner possibly being traded for Seth Jones. But first, I need to talk to you all about Policy Genius. With Policy Genius, you can find life insurance policies that start at just $292 per year for $1 million worth of coverage. And some options offer same-day approvals and also help avoid unnecessary medical exams. And Policy Genius is the country's leading online insurance marketplace that helps save you both time and money, so you can provide your family with a financial safety net starting right here today. Go and talk to a team of award-winning agents who will walk you through the entire process step by step along your side, comparing quotes from America's top insurers in just a few clicks to get you the best and lowest price. And Policy Genius is a trustworthy marketplace with thousands of 5-star reviews on both Google and Trustpilot from customers who found their best fit for their needs. So go and check life insurance off of your to-do list in no time with Policy Genius. Head on over to policygenius.com/LockedOnNHL, or simply go and click the link down in the description to get your free life insurance quotes today and see how much that you could be saving. Again, it's policygenius.com/LockedOnNHL. Segment 2, following the Toronto Maple Leafs being knocked out of the Stanley Cup playoffs early once again. It's like, it happens every year. It's like Christmas. It's like Thanksgiving. It's like a holiday. The Toronto Maple Leafs usually being knocked out of the first round of the Stanley Cup playoffs. I know last year they made it to the second round, but every year in and year out, it's some sort of heartbreak for the Toronto Maple Leafs. And now, following this year's Game 7 defeat to the hands of the Boston Bruins, questions once again have begun swirling surrounding the future of the Leafs, their core four. Sheldon Keefe, their head coach, has already been fired. Looks like there could be some big changes happening to the Toronto Maple Leafs here this summer. And the player that's being talked about the most, the player whose future is in the conversation the most, is Mitch Marner, because Austin Matthews, I believe he still has 3 years left on his current deal. He's got kind of a bridge deal going on. William Nylander is locked up long-term. John Tavares, given his contract and the Leafs situation, his age, I think it's pretty clear-cut and dry that he's not going to be re-signed by that team once his contract expires. So the man that's future is most up in the air is Mitch Marner, 27-year-old winger who's got 1 year left on his current deal at $10.9 million. After that, he's going to become an unrestricted free agent. So yeah, Marner is the one whose future is the biggest question mark here. And there's just a lot of questions, and this could go a lot of different ways. Like, does Mitch Marner want to come back to Toronto? Does he want to get an extension done? If he's not wanting to get an extension done, do the Toronto Maple Leafs try to trade him this summer? Does he want to stay there? Does he want to wait it out until free agency next year? There's a lot of questions. And if he's not in their future plans, then there's so many different conversations about where he could ultimately end up. And earlier on in the week, Jeff Merrick, Elliot Friedman on their 32 Thoughts podcast brought up Mitch Marner and where he could potentially be going if it's not back to the Toronto Maple Leafs this summer. And Friedman brought up Seth Jones's name into the conversation, saying a possibility of Seth Jones being traded for Mitch Marner to go and kind of boost the Maple Leafs decor that's been reeling for years and years and years. In theory, that could kind of make sense. And there's been a lot of different thoughts and opinions shared on this in the Blackhawks Twitterverse community, if you will, whatever you want to call it. So I figured I would have to go and share my thoughts on this matter here live on the show. First thing I will say is 100%. Yeah, I'm in this deal if I'm the Chicago Blackhawks. And I don't care what anyone says about Mitch Marner and his playoff. Well, this is a guy who has 50 points in 57 career playoff games, 11 goals, 39 assists, one of the most talented players in the entire league. This would be a win for the Chicago Blackhawks to get Mitch Marner to join this team in the top six, along with Connor Bedard, a guy who's put up 90 points 3 times, been a 30 goal scorer 2 times. And if it weren't in Toronto, I think he'd be thought about a little bit differently, particularly with his production in the Stanley Cup playoffs, because it's not nearly as bad as what it's kind of made out to be. Does he play a style that necessarily translates the best to the Stanley Cup playoffs? No, but people act like he's like a Toronto. People act like he's like a third liner come playoff time, and that just isn't the case. However, there's a lot of complex things kind of behind the scenes in order to make this deal happen. First and foremost, both of them have no movement clauses, Seth Jones and Mitch Marner. So the first question is, would Marner waive his no movement clause to come to Chicago, or is he willing to waive his no movement clause in general? That's going to be the biggest story of the offseason. Is Marner willing to waive his no movement clause to get dealt? Now, this is an outsider perspective, but the opportunity to play with Bedard, if he doesn't want to stay in Toronto, I think Chicago would make a lot of sense. And I think even if the Blackhawks don't try to trade for him, I think it would make a lot of sense. Considering Nylander's now tied up long-term, the Hawks can't go after him. I wouldn't be mad if the Blackhawks pursued Mitch Marner in free agency. And I think if you don't want the Blackhawks to pursue Mitch Marner, you're a little bit crazy. So I think Marner waiving his no movement clause to come to Chicago isn't out of the cards. On the other end, Seth Jones waiving his no movement clause to go to Toronto, it's a little bit less cut and dry, because theoretically, yeah, he gets to go and play meaningful playoff type of hockey once again, something that he hasn't done for a long, long time. And he didn't want to get traded to Chicago to go and enter a rebuild. So that would kind of solve that problem. However, Toronto obviously is a heavily scrutinized market. He'd have to go and deal with the media there. He'd be looked at as kind of the savior of the blue line for the Leafs. And if he doesn't live up to those expectations, they're going to hate him forever. So it's a little bit more complicated than that in terms of Seth Jones waiving his no movement clause. But in theory, this deal would make sense. Now, the Blackhawks absolutely would have to give some more here. Toronto would not say yes to Mitch Marner for Seth Jones. I also, just because of the $9.5 million cap hit, right? Getting into their deals here is actually something I did want to do. Seth Jones has 6 years left at $9.5 million with that no movement clause. Turns 30 years old in October and had 31 points, 8 goals, 23 assists in 67 games this year. His third was Chicago. Whereas Marner has 1 year left at $10.9 million, then becomes an unrestricted free agent. If the Blackhawks were to trade for him, there'd have to be some sort of extension in place, especially if Seth Jones is in the deal. They're not just going to trade Seth for 1 year of Mitch Marner and then risk losing him in free agency when they could possibly pursue him in free agency and not give up anything. But Marner's 27, 1 year left at $10.9 million, has a no movement clause as well, coming off of 85 points in 69 games this year, 26 goals and 59 assists, over a point per game player in each of his last 6 NHL seasons. And as I referenced, 90-point guy 3 times and a 2-time 30-goal scorer. So this deal in theory makes sense for the Blackhawks. I do have some questions, though, about whether they'd want to make this trade right now. If Marner doesn't do a sign and trade with someone else, they could go and give him the bag in free agency. I also think making this trade right now kind of maybe forces the Blackhawks into taking that next step of their rebuild a little bit sooner than they'd want to. But if Mitch Marner's on the table, I think the Blackhawks would absolutely be calling. This is one of those rare opportunities where they could potentially move Seth Jones's contract if they were to want to. Now, it all would end up in Seth Jones' hands regardless, because he has the no movement clause here. There's a lot of things that make this deal complex because of that. I ultimately don't expect it to happen, but I think it would be crazy for any Blackhawks fan to immediately turn down Mitch Marner, especially when even I, as a Seth Jones truther, defender, whatever you want to call it, understand it's a really bad contract and he hasn't lived up to those expectations so far here in Chicago for the most part. This could be one of those few positions where they could move Seth Jones's contract. Ultimately, I don't see this ending up happening. I think there's just too much complexities into it, but it's an intriguing offseason storyline, and anything surrounding Mitch Marner is going to get talked about a ton this offseason, given the core four still hasn't accomplished anything in their time together with the Toronto Maple Leafs. What winds up happening to Mitch Marner? Absolutely going to be one of the biggest storylines of the offseason. Does he end up with the Chicago Blackhawks? Very, very highly unlikely this summer. But if he does hit unrestricted free agency the following summer, would not be surprised to see the Blackhawks going after him. General manager Kyle Davidson, I think it would be wise to get a true top 6 point per game player like Mitch Marner on their side when they expect to become playoff contenders again here in the Blackhawks organization. All right. There are my thoughts on the potential Mitch Marner for Seth Jones trade coming up in just a moment here. I know this episode's a little bit long, but I do still have to get into some key details on the 2024 NHL Draft. But first, I need to talk to you all about Indeed. When you're drafting your fantasy team, do you ever wish that you could handpick the best stars for your business team? Well, if you're building your talent roster, then you need Indeed, because Indeed is the only job site out there where you're guaranteed to find quality applications that meet your must-have requirements, or else you don't pay. So instead of spending countless hours on multiple job sites hoping to find candidates with the right skills, you need to use the one powerful hiring partner that can help you do it all, and that is Indeed. Indeed streamlines the hiring process with powerful tools that find you match candidates in an instant. And again, I personally love Indeed because it's the only job site out there where you only pay for applications that meet those must-have requirements and standards. And Indeed knows that when you're growing your business, you got to make every dollar count. And according to ComScore, Indeed is the #1 job site worldwide, and Indeed delivers 4 times more hires than all other job sites combined, according to Talent Nest. So start hiring right now at Indeed.com/lockedon. Again, go to Indeed.com/lockedon for quality applications that meet your hiring criteria. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? Then you need Indeed. Back here on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Again, if you're still watching this on YouTube right now, like, comment, subscribe. Thank you very much. And also, make sure to go and check out the new Locked On Sports Today, because Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every single league. So make sure to go and check out Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and to subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Segment 3, before I wrap things up here today, I did want to be sure to go over all the picks the Blackhawks have in the 2024 NHL Draft. Everything is now officially finalized, so that we all just kind of have a better understanding of exactly the type of draft capital that the Blackhawks have leading into this year's draft. And as Kyle Davidson alluded to the other day when he had his interview, and also based on what we've seen from him since taking over as general manager of the Blackhawks, you can probably expect the Hawks to be pretty active during day 1 and day 2 of this year's draft, whether that's trading up from number 20, the second first round selection the Blackhawks have this year from Tampa Bay, or maybe trading into the first round for a third first round selection like we saw in 2022. I do just want to be sure to let you all know exactly what the Blackhawks have in their back pocket going into this year's draft, so we can kind of map out or see what type of moves are at least possible, as well as some detail for this year's draft, which is just over a month away. So getting into the Blackhawks picks, all the selections they hold, they have 7 within the first 3 rounds of this year's draft. Adding to the prospect pool even more, there's so many players already in this prospect pool that make it so intriguing. I can't believe they probably aren't going to be making all 7 of those picks within the first 3 rounds, if I'm being honest here. But even adding like 4 or 5 more names to this prospect pool, man, it's going to make things so much fun in the future. In the first round, we know the Blackhawks have number 2. Again, comment down below, Demidov, Levshunov. Let me hear what you have to say. They also have the 20th overall pick from the Tampa Bay Lightning. And then in the second round, they have the 34th pick, which is the second pick in the second round. So a very intriguing selection there, along with numbers 54 and number 60. And then in the third round, they also have 67 and 72, and those are early third round picks. So could be intriguing as part of package in a trade for the Blackhawks. After the third round, they don't have a fourth round pick this year. They have one in the fifth at number 138 and then one in the sixth at number 163. But the ones that everyone's really going to be talking about, those 7 selections they have within the first 3 rounds. And then as far as some details for this year's draft, round 1 officially has been set for Friday, June 28th at the Sphere in Las Vegas. Should make for a pretty fun and interactive draft experience. I'm hoping maybe not as cringe as they made the draft lottery where they just kept asking Macklin Celebrini what he was feeling in his stomach. It was super, super weird. I got weird vibes from that whole thing. Hopefully won't get weird vibes from the NHL draft coverage this year. Day 2 will obviously be the following day, Saturday, June 29th, and the NHL draft will be televised on ESPN and NHL Network here in the United States. All right, there is everything you need to know on Artyom Levshunov's draft profile, the Mitch Marner and Seth Jones saga, and all the picks the Blackhawks have in this year's draft. That's going to wrap up today's episode of Locked On Blackhawks. I know it was a long one. I hope everyone out there enjoyed. If you did, make sure to hit that like button. Also, make sure to subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube. If you're tuning in through an audio platform, go and follow the podcast if you haven't done so already. That way you can get all of the latest episodes as soon as they're available each and every day. As always, I'm your host, Jack Bushman. You can check me out on X at JackBushman2. You can also go and see my Strictly Blackhawks account at Talkin' Hockey if you want. That way you can get all of the latest Blackhawks news and updates. So until tomorrow's episode, everyone, enjoy the rest of your days. Enjoy the rest of your weekends. I'll see you next time on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.